Welcome to Tales of Kind Souls, where stories of courage, kindness, and humanity come alive. It was a late evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the streets are usually silent, except for the occasional sound of crickets or the distant bark of a dog. But on this night, something far more dangerous was about to unfold. Michael, a single father in his mid-30s, was returning home from his late shift. His job at the warehouse had left him exhausted, but he didn't mind. His daughter, Emily, just 12 years old, was his world, and every ounce of sweat he gave was for her future. Their small two-bedroom apartment wasn't much, but it was warm, safe, and filled with love. As he walked back from the small convenience store with a bag of groceries, he heard something unusual. A muffled cry, followed by the sound of struggle. Michael slowed his pace and turned his head. Just a few steps ahead, in the dimly lit alley beside an old hardware store, two men were cornering someone. At first, it was hard to see who it was. But then, as one of them shoved her against the wall, the faint gleam of a badge caught the light. It was a female police officer. Her uniform was torn in places, and she was clearly injured. Blood stained her sleeve, and she was struggling to hold on, gasping for air as the two men pressed forward. One had a knife, the other carried a chain. They were much larger, their movements filled with aggression, while she was barely standing. Michael froze. His instincts screamed at him to back away. He had Emily waiting at home. He had promised her that he would come back safe. What if he didn't? But then another thought hit him. If this woman died here tonight, how could he live with himself? She wasn't just an officer. She was a human being, someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister, maybe even someone's mother. Taking a deep breath, Michael dropped his grocery bag silently to the ground. His heart pounded so hard that it echoed in his ears. He had no weapon, no training beyond the rough lessons life had taught him, but he had courage. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The attackers turned, their faces twisted with annoyance at being interrupted. One of them sneered, "Mind your business, man. Walk away unless you want to end up the same." Michael swallowed hard, but stood firm. "Let her go," he demanded, though his voice trembled. The officer, barely conscious, lifted her eyes toward him. For a brief second, she looked at Michael as if he was her last hope. That look gave him strength. The man with the chain stepped forward. "You really don't want to do this," he growled. But Michael wasn't backing down. He shifted his stance, his fists clenched. He remembered the promise he made to Emily, to be a good man, to do the right thing, even when it was hard. Right. Now this was the right thing. The fight was brutal. The first swing of the chain sliced across Michael's arm, ripping his sleeve open and leaving a burning pain. He gritted his teeth, lunged forward, and tackled the man with the chain to the ground. The two wrestled, fists flying, grunts echoing in the narrow alley. The other attacker rushed forward with his knife. Michael barely managed to roll away in time, kicking the weapon out of the man's hand with a desperate, adrenaline-fueled strike. But the knife skittered dangerously close to the officer's feet. She tried to reach it, her hand trembling, but her strength was fading. Michael took another hit, this time a punch across his jaw that sent stars exploding in his vision. He staggered, but didn't fall. He thought of Emily, her smile, her laugh, the way she hugged him tight when she was scared. He couldn't let his daughter grow up in a world where people turned away when others needed help. With a roar, he pushed himself back into the fight. He slammed his elbow into the stomach of the man with the chain, knocking the wind out of him, then swung with every ounce of his strength, landing a punch that sent the man collapsing. But the knife-wielding attacker wasn't done. He lunged again, rage twisting his face. Michael had no time to think. He grabbed a loose piece of wood lying near the trash cans and swung it wildly. The wood cracked against the attacker's arm, making him drop the knife. Breathing hard, Michael positioned himself between the attackers and the injured cop. "You'll have to go through me," he said, his voice raw but firm. The attackers hesitated. One was clutching his stomach, barely able to stand, while the other rubbed his injured arm, glaring with fury but also caution. They hadn't expected resistance, especially not from an ordinary man with nothing to lose but everything to protect. Realizing the fight was turning against them, the two men exchanged a look and bolted into the shadows of the night, leaving the alley silent again. Michael dropped the piece of wood and rushed to the officer. She was slumped against the wall, pale and weak. "Stay with me," he urged. "You're gonna be okay." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would come." Michael pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. His voice cracked as he gave their location, begging them to hurry. Then, tearing a strip from his shirt, he pressed it against her wound to slow the bleeding. "You're safe now," he whispered, more to himself than to her. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the sound of sirens pierced the night. Patrol cars pulled up, lights flashing, and paramedics rushed to the scene. Michael stepped back exhausted, his body aching from bruises and cuts, but his heart steady. The paramedics lifted the officer onto a stretcher. As they did, her hand weakly reached out, brushing against Michael's. Her eyes met his once more, filled with gratitude that words could never fully express. One of the officers asked him what had happened, and Michael explained everything. They looked at him with astonishment and respect, recognizing the courage it took to stand against two armed attackers without any weapon of his own. Later that night, after giving his statement, Michael finally returned home. Emily was waiting at the door, her little face filled with worry. When she saw the bruises on him, she gasped, "Daddy, what happened?" He knelt down, hugging her tight. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Daddy just had to help someone tonight." She pressed her small hands against his cheeks, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're my hero." Michael smiled, though his body ached. "No, baby. I just did what anyone should do. We have to help each other. That's what makes the world better." Days later, news of the incident spread. The officer had survived thanks to Michael's bravery. At the hospital, she asked to see him. When he arrived, she was still weak but alive, her eyes brighter than before. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I'll never forget what you did." Michael shook his head humbly. "You're the real hero. You risk your life every day to protect people like me and my daughter. I just couldn't let you face that alone." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "You didn't just protect me, you reminded me why I became a cop in the first place. To believe in people like you." In the weeks that followed, Michael returned to his routine. Life wasn't suddenly easier. The bills still came, the long shifts still wore him down, but something had changed. He had proven to himself and to his daughter that courage wasn't about having no fear. It was about facing fear for the sake of others. Emily told everyone at school that her dad was a hero, and though Michael always chuckled and brushed it off, deep down he knew that on that night, in that dark alley, he had chosen to be more than just a bystander. He had chosen to be kind, to be brave, to be human, and sometimes that's what makes all the difference. This is Tales of Kind Souls. If this story touched your heart, remember that even in the darkest moments, courage and kindness can light the way.